because now we're going to try and get the full picture. But before we get to what did he act like, we have to ask, just like we did with the question of beauty, we have to ask a kind of preceding question, which is, what is virtue anyway? What is virtue? This is a very important question. I mean, really and truly, the first person to, I mean, not the first, but the first people to really talk about this and write about this, I mean, that we have in the Western tradition, and I'll be very specific here, not obviously in any tradition, are the Greeks. And in particular, I think one of the main books on this topic is a book called the Nicomachean Ethics. The Nicomachean Ethics was a book that Aristotle wrote to his son. Okay, his son is, I think, Nicomacheus or whatever his name was, right? And he wrote a book for him talking about what is, what's good, what does it look like to be virtuous. And in this book, basically what he was saying was that he had this idea of the golden mean, that you got two sides of the extremities and then you have them in the middle. But what is all this moving towards? Something he called eudaimonia. So it's what is referred to as the good life, well-being, welfare, satisfaction, fulfillment. His idea was that if you act in these ways, you're going to be fulfilled in life. If you act in these virtuous manner. And he was half right, and we'll come to that. He was half right about that. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I have only been sent so I can perfect good character. I've only been sent to perfect good character. But there was a missing ingredient in Aristotle's concoction, which we'll come to in a second. And some of the things that he proposed were problematic. Before we get to that though, he had 18 virtues, 18, which he said are the most important virtues. Okay? And of these 18, he said 9 of the 18 are the chief most important kind of virtues. So I'm going to go through them with you. And then I'm going to explain how he came to those conclusions. So the first one, and by the way, the most important one according to him was courage. Because he said that if you don't have courage, you can't do anything else. Yeah, and for him, the main virtue was if you don't have courage, you cannot implement anything in your life. If you're a coward, it's the worst thing you can effectively be. And in fact, there's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad he says, شَرٌ مَا فِي الرَّجُلِ بُخْلٌ هَالَعْ وَجُبْنٌ خَالِعْ. The worst thing that's in a man is stinginess and cowardice. So in a way, there is some level of Islamic corroboration of this, but courage was seen by Aristotle to be the most important thing. In addition to courage, temperance. Now, what is temperance? Temperance is the idea of self-control among the desires. And there were 2 desires in particular that he referred to, and many others after him referred to as the irascible, and referred to as the irascible desires, which is basically your anger. And being angry is you're irascible if you're angry. And what's the other one? And your sexual desires, yeah. Which there's a technical term for it, which I forget now. What? No.
It'll come to me.
It'll come to you.
Chastity.
No. It's called the. It's another term for it. I'll come to it. Yeah. It's going to come in the next slide, in fact. But temperance is where you're able to control those 2 desires. Let me show you the next slide.
Libido.
No. It's let me see. No, it's not the next slide. It's okay. We'll come to it. Don't worry. But basically, your 2 sexual desires, and all other desires like anger, sexual desires, temperance is your ability to control those 2. And we'll come to how the Prophet ﷺ did that. In fact, we can mention it now because it's quite easy to mention. I'll mention 3 examples. Okay. One example is that Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that the Prophet ﷺ is in Bukhari. So I should mention this hadith is in Bukhari. And she said that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to kiss his wives in Ramadan. Now obviously, why she's mentioning that is because there's different rulings for different people with that regard. Like a platonic kiss, not a romantic or a sexual kiss. It's just a platonic kiss. She said that he used to kiss his wives in Ramadan and that he's amlakakum li irbihi. He is the most in control of his sexual desires. In other words, it wouldn't faze him. He wouldn't feel like he needs to do anything. He was amlakakum li irbihi. And this is interesting that Aisha is the one who said this because of what kind of attacks that we have of the Prophet ﷺ vis-a-vis Aisha. As if he was, he was lusting over her and all these kind of things that they're trying to say. But if that's the case, why is she the one that's testifying that he's amlakakum li irbihi? And she's speaking with confidence. He's the best of you. And she's referring to all of the men to his sexual desires. She knows that there's no higher that he can be than that. And on that point, by the way, this might sound a bit unusual. I came across a hadith, and I need to check the takhrij of it. But the Prophet, Aisha said that she's never seen the Prophet ﷺ's private parts. Now, you might find that unusual, but I don't know how that came about, but she says this. So it shows you the sensibility and the privacy, and the potentially shows the shyness that she had towards him.
Says a hadith.
I'll bring the hadith. But there's that aspect. But that's the first hadith I want to bring is Amlakum li-irbihi. This is in Bukhari, this well-known hadith. The second hadith is the following. This is also in Bukhari, where there was a woman that Prophet ﷺ married. Not people know her name. Her name is Bint Joan. Al-Jawniya, or they give her different names. And she basically said in the night of consummation, she said, A'udhu billah mink. She said to the Prophet ﷺ, I seek refuge in Allah from you. Now, the scholars of hadith, they discuss why did she even say this word. Ibn Hajar says, for example, Al-Asqalani, he says that Aisha radiallahu anha said to her, this is something the Prophet would enjoy for you to say. It's a weird thing to say, but she said that to try and create this discord and create a divorce. Maybe.
And this is divorced, yeah?
Huh?
She was divorced.
So what happened is that Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, "Idhabi li ahlik," or go back to your family, which means it was divorced. Now, this is a very important hadith for many reasons. There are many anti-Islamic apologists, effectively, who are liars, who lie about the Prophet ﷺ, say that he forced women in a manner that is indecent. Yeah. But this hadith itself is a great refutation of that. Because if that was his proclivity and his temperament, then why is he telling another woman in the heat of the moment to go back to your family? When she indicated in not even a fully clear manner that she didn't want to be in that situation. He didn't say, no, I am your husband and it must be, and you must give me my rights. He said, if you don't want to be here, then you leave. And she left, and it was a divorce. And so there wasn't a consummation of that marriage. So the so-called, they call it grape or allegations, whatever, this itself shows you how feeble those attempts are. And by the way, there's no one hadith itlaqan that indicates at all that the Prophet ﷺ ever forced a woman to do something she didn't want to do in that regard. So it shows you not only that these accusations are false, but it also shows you that when the Prophet ﷺ, by the admission of the women around him and the testimonials around him, he was never taking advantage in that manner. And that he was in control of himself and he was temperate in that way. Another thing is to see his behavior before he married Khadija. By all accounts, as we'll find, he was not known in the community for going with women. But if his behavior and his temper, if his general disposition was that of a man who was lustful and so on, so how don't we have any report, not even one, saying that he was engaging with a woman before Khadija? And when he was with Khadija, that he was only with Khadija. For a man of that age, until 25 years old, in that society, it would be seen as unusual for him to be chaste for that long, effectively. And then when he's 25 to 40, for him to continue just with one woman, and there's no indication that he even married a second. But that shows you a degree of discipline, and a degree of temperance, and a degree of controlling your desires. Especially in a situation, we think we have it bad. They had it bad as well. They had prostitutes, they had women, they had people who were naked, they had slave girls in the market, they had everything. We think we're the only men in history that have seen women on billboards and naked people. They also saw naked people walking around. The Prophet ﷺ was shielded from that and was not engaging in that culture. And there's no one report that indicates anything to the contrary of what I've just mentioned. So these are just 3 examples of the temperance of the Prophet ﷺ. Courage, I'm going to treat separately. That's why I've left it for now, because I want to define what that is. I want to talk about it, and it's one of those virtues that I think we need to talk about in a bit more detail. Liberality, and this is something which is kind of in the Quran. So it's between what is being stingy and profligate, which is the idea of being extravagant or spending money out of no reason and without wisdom. And Allah says in the Quran, وَلَا تَجْعَلْ يَدِكَ مَغْلُولَةً إِلَىٰ عُنُقِكَ وَلَا تَبْسُطْهَا كُلَّ الْبَسْطِ. Do not bring your hand, to your neck, effectively. And this is like obviously metaphoric description. And do not extend it all the way, which means don't overspend and don't keep it too close. But if you look, and we'll talk about it, the Prophet ﷺ was generous, and he was the most generous. And I'll show you some of the hadith that relate to the generosity of the Prophet. You'll be very surprised. You'll be extremely surprised. Which, by the way, dispels and dismisses the hadith that I'm going to present. Dispels and dismisses the idea that the Prophet ﷺ was doing this for money. was for doing this for material gain. And we'll come to those hadiths in due course. But obviously, if we did this with every single one of them, it would be problematic. Magnificence is basically ihsan, proficiency in doing a good job of something. So this is one of the things that Aristotle talks about as well. And you can see the connection there between the Islamic paradigm. And there's many hadith of 40 nawi. If you're going to do something, then ihsan. But it's the idea, فَأَحْسِنُ الْقِتْلَى, if you're going to slaughter, then do it with ihsan, because in fact, this is a very interesting hadith, because it shows you that there are some things that you have to do more proficiently than others. For example, if you're going to slaughter an animal and you do that unproficiently, without prudence and competence, you're making the animal suffer. But likewise, if you are a surgeon and you have to perform surgery and you don't do that with ihsan, you can cause death. As the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man tatabbaba wa lam yakun bit-tibbi ma'rufan fa asaba nafsan fa huwa damin." Whoever who pretends to be a doctor and he causes injury to somebody, he's not actually a doctor, then he's actually responsible for that. And the same thing applies in da'wah and fiqh and all this kind of fatwa and all that kind of stuff. Because why not? At the end of the day, if you don't do it with ihsan, if everything is haphazard and whatever, then you are also, if people go astray, if people are misguided, then you are held account. So ihsan is something that the religion of Islam very clearly, and that's why I know we put it in his 40 hadith, because it's one of those things which are very clear, important things the religion of Islam mentions. Greatness of soul, he mentioned, which is effectively being high-minded, or the idea of not being afflicted by travesty. And we know the very famous hadith of in asabatu dara sabar wa in asabatu sarra shakar wa in asabatu dara sabara wa shakar. That the Prophet ﷺ is advising everyone that if difficulty befalls you, then you have to be patient. If good things happen to you, you have to be thankful. And if difficulty befalls you, have to be patient and thankful. But if you think about the Prophet ﷺ's life himself, and we'll come to this maybe in what follows, but just this thing alone, all of his children died except for one. Tell me of a bigger travesty that you can imagine happening to a human being. I cannot imagine something worse happening to another human being. If you've got children, you know what I'm talking about. There's nothing more difficult than you can imagine than losing your child. There's nothing more. All of his children except for Fatima radiallahu anha, all of them died. He had to go through the pain that many times.
And his wife and his uncle.
In 1 year.
And his wife and his uncle.
Close.
Exactly. Exactly, the year of sorrow and stuff. And how did he handle that?
The child, your spouses.
How did he handle that? The fact that he handled that with grace and with patience, and that was documented, wallahi, it shows this man is practicing exactly what he preaches. And it's very important also to note that there was a very interesting and famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ going to the graveyard, and there was a woman wailing and stuff like that because she had lost her son. And then that particular woman, she started saying, you don't know what I went through, and you don't know whatever. He walked away, and then they told her, that's the Prophet of Allah. And then she went back to him, and what he said to her is very powerful. He said that as-sabru 'inda sadmatil ula, that certainly patience is upon the first calamity. So it has, see, look, these Aristotelian principles, you can see how Islam is actually much more advanced in telling us how you can implement them. Al-ihsan is telling us where and when to implement ihsan, more importantly. When it comes to high-mindedness or so-called magnificence, Islam is telling us actually how can you implement patience and high-mindedness at the highest level when you first get struck with the calamity. That's where the most pain is. That is when that is when the test really is. And the Prophet ﷺ, he went through all of those tests and he passed all of those tests in front of the people. And that shows you resolve, it shows you depth of character, and it shows you that he is practicing exactly what he preaches. And that's something that if you're a fraud, you'd be completely exposed. If you're doing these kinds of things and then your children die and stuff like that, but you didn't have what you claim to have, patience and high-mindedness and stuff like that, then you would crumble at that. Screaming and, how can my kids, and bring the people around me, and do you know what I mean? If he didn't have those characteristics, how would somebody who doesn't have those characteristics respond to 5 children dying, his wife dying, his uncles dying, so many people in jihad dying as well, his close relatives? He always picked himself up and continued. We would never be...
The incident of Taif as well.
The incident of Taif.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Which we're going to cover in more detail, of course, as well.